My name is Emma Carter, and I have called the dusty red hills of Arizona my home for nearly 20 years, but I have lived in this specific house for about 8 years now. At 45 years old, I have learned that peace of mind is the most valuable thing a person can own, especially when you live out in a rural neighborhood where the nearest grocery store is a 20-minute drive, and your closest neighbors are usually more interested in their own livestock than what you are doing on your porch. I am a woman who appreciates the silence of the desert and the way the sun paints the sky in shades of violet and burnt orange every evening. My property is my sanctuary. It is a few acres of scrub brush and rocky soil where I keep my collection of vintage trucks and a couple of project cars that I plan to restore when I finally have the time and the spare parts. I have always been the kind of person who stays out of everyone else's business, and I expected the same in return. For 7 years, that was exactly how things went. My neighbors to the north were an elderly couple who mostly stayed inside, and my neighbors to the south were non-existent because the lot was empty and owned by some big investment company that seemed to have forgotten it existed. I had a simple wooden post in the ground that I used as a marker for where I thought my land ended and the empty lot began. I had never bothered with a professional survey because in this part of the country, we usually just respected the natural lines and the existing fences. That changed a year ago when a man named Julian moved in. Julian was from California, and he brought with him a level of entitlement that did not sit well with the dry heat of Arizona. He was in his late 30s and always looked like he was dressed for a yacht club instead of a desert landscape. He bought the empty lot next to mine and immediately started building what could only be described as a modern glass fortress. It was all sharp angles and cold steel, which looked completely out of place next to my modest ranch-style home and my dusty trucks. From the very first day Julian arrived, he made it clear that he thought he was superior to everyone in the neighborhood. He would walk around his construction site with a tablet in his hand and a scowl on his face, as if the very existence of the desert was an insult to his aesthetic sensibilities. The real trouble started when he decided that my property line was a personal affront to him. One afternoon, I was out in my yard working on the engine of a 1969 Chevrolet C10 pickup truck. The sun was beating down on my back, and I was covered in grease and sweat, but I was happy. That was until I heard the sound of a luxury sports car engine screaming down our dirt road. Julian pulled into his driveway and jumped out of his car before the engine had even fully stopped. He marched over to the edge of his property and pointed a finger at my truck, which was parked near that old wooden post I had put in years ago. He started screaming about how my junk was encroaching on his land. He claimed that the tip of my truck's bumper was at least 9 inches over the line and into his property. I wiped my hands on a rag and walked over trying to be a good neighbor. I told him that I had been parking there for years and that the post had always been the marker. Julian did not care. He went on a tirade about how he had paid a premium for his land and he would not have it defiled by my rusted-out metal scraps. He used words like property value and zoning regulations as if they were weapons. He threatened to have my truck towed by the end of the week if I did not move it. I tried to explain that it was just a few inches and that we were in the middle of nowhere, so it really did not matter, but he would not listen. He called me a desert rat and said that people like me were the reason he wanted a wall around his house. That was the moment I realized that Julian was not just a difficult neighbor, but he was my nemesis. Over the next few weeks, the situation went from bad to worse. I tried to move the truck a little bit just to keep the peace, but Julian was never satisfied. He would come out with a measuring tape and claim that some other part of my life was spilling onto his pristine dirt. He started calling the county code enforcement office on me for everything he could think of. He complained about the noise of my tools and the dust that my trucks kicked up and even the height of my cactus garden. Every time an inspector showed up, they would see that I was not actually breaking any rules, but the constant harassment was wearing me down. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. I tried to talk to him one more time to see if we could reach some kind of understanding. I even offered to bake some bread and bring it over as a peace offering, but Julian just laughed in my face. He told me that he was going to build a massive stone wall exactly on the property line and that he would make sure I could never see the sunset again. He said that he was going to hire the best contractors and that they would follow the line to the millimeter. He was so smug about it. He told me that his 9 inches of land were more valuable than my entire existence. I went back to my house feeling defeated. I felt like I was losing my grip on the place I loved. I looked at that old wooden post and realized that I had no proof of where my land actually ended. If Julian wanted to be a stickler for the rules, then I decided I needed to know exactly what the rules were. I decided to hire a professional land surveyor. It was an expensive decision, and it took a big chunk out of my savings, but I needed to know the truth. I called a company that had been in business in Arizona for 40 years. A man named Miller came out a few days later. He was a grizzled old guy who looked like he had spent his entire life measuring the world 1 foot at a time. He set up his equipment and started looking for the original brass pins that were buried in the ground back when the area was first subdivided. Julian watched from his balcony like a hawk. He was smirking and sipping on a glass of wine, probably thinking that the surveyor was going to confirm his suspicions and give him the legal right to crush me. Miller worked for hours. He walked back and forth across the dusty ground hammering stakes and looking through his transit. I stayed inside and watched through the window feeling my stomach do flips. I was terrified that Julian was right and that I would have to move everything I owned and lose my privacy to his giant wall. Around sunset, Miller knocked on my door. He had a strange look on his face. He asked me to come outside and walk the line with him. Julian saw us and came running down from his house acting like he already won. Julian started bragging about how he was going to start construction on his wall the very next morning and how I should get ready to say goodbye to my view. Miller just looked at Julian and then looked at his charts. He told us that he had found the original survey pins from 1975. He pointed to a spot that was nearly 20 feet away from where Julian thought the property line was. Julian's face went pale. He asked what that meant. Miller explained that the property line did not go where Julian thought it did. In fact, it turned out that the line was shifted significantly into what Julian believed was his yard. My old wooden post had been a very conservative estimate of my land. The actual legal boundary was 20 feet further south. This meant that the entire edge of Julian's driveway and a significant portion of his planned stone wall were actually on my property. But it got even better. Julian had already started building a guest house and a fancy infinity pool on the back of his lot. According to the surveyor's new and accurate measurements, a large corner of the guest house and about a third of the pool were sitting squarely on my land. I stood there in the fading light and felt a wave of relief wash over me that was so strong I almost felt dizzy. Julian was speechless. His mouth was hanging open, and he looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He started stuttering about how that was impossible and how his real estate agent had told him something different. Miller just shrugged and said that real estate agents are not surveyors and that the brass pins do not lie. I looked at Julian, and for the first time in a year I smiled. I told him that it looked like he was the one who had his junk on my property. I told him that since he was so concerned about property lines and the law, I was going to have to insist that he respect my space. Julian tried to change his tune immediately. He started acting like we were old friends and suggested that we could work something out. He said he would pay me a small fee to just let things stay the way they were. He even apologized for being so aggressive before. But I remembered the way he had talked to me and the way he had tried to ruin my life over 9 inches of dirt. I remembered him calling me a desert rat and threatening to tow my trucks. I decided that I was not going to be nice anymore. I told him that I needed some time to think about how I wanted to handle this situation. The next day, I went to see a lawyer who specialized in land disputes. I wanted to know exactly what my rights were. The lawyer told me that since the structures were new and I had not given permission for them to be built, I could force him to remove them. I could also charge him back rent for the time he had been occupying my land. The legal power I had was immense. I decided to play the long game. I did not rush to the court. Instead, I let Julian stew in his own anxiety for a few weeks. Every time he saw me, he would wave and try to start a friendly conversation, but I would just nod and keep working on my trucks. He stopped calling code enforcement, and he stopped complaining about the noise. He was terrified. Finally, I sent him a formal letter through my lawyer. I told him that I was reclaiming my 20 feet of land. I gave him 30 days to remove any and all structures that were on my property. This included the edge of his driveway and the portion of the guest house and the pool. Julian went into a panic. He called me dozens of times and even came to my door crying. He said that moving those things would cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars and might even ruin the structural integrity of his entire house. He begged me for a compromise. I told him that I would consider a land swap, but only if it was heavily in my favor. I told him that I wanted a piece of his land on the other side of his property that connected to a beautiful canyon view which he had previously blocked with his construction. I also wanted him to pay for a new high-quality fence that would be built exactly on the new line, but at his expense. He had no choice but to agree. The process took months of legal paperwork and engineering surveys, but in the end I came out on top. Julian had to pay a fortune to reroute his driveway and modify his pool and guest house so they did not cross the line. He lost a huge portion of his yard and the privacy he was so obsessed with. I, on the other hand, now had an even larger property with a better view of the desert landscape. I used the money he paid me in damages to finally finish the restoration of my 1969 Chevrolet C10. I also hired a crew to build a beautiful desert garden on the extra 20 feet of land I had reclaimed. Now when I sit on my porch, I can look out over my expanded kingdom and see the sun setting over the canyon. Julian is still my neighbor, but he is a changed man. He rarely comes outside, and when he does, he keeps his eyes on the ground. He learned a very expensive lesson about being a bully. He thought he could push me around for 9 inches, but he ended up losing 20 feet and a whole lot of pride. The desert has a way of leveling things out, and I have never felt more at home. I sometimes see him looking at my trucks from his glass balcony, and I just wave my wrench at him. He knows better than to say a word. Life in Arizona is quiet once again, and that is exactly how I like it. My vintage trucks are parked exactly where they belong, and not a single inch of them is on anyone else's land. I have a new sense of peace and a much larger backyard to enjoy it in. The moral of the story is that you should always be careful who you pick a fight with, because you never know where the lines are truly drawn until someone starts digging. I am 45 years old, and I have many more years of desert sunsets to look forward to, and thanks to my neighbor from California, those sunsets are now 20 feet more beautiful than they were before. It is funny how things work out when you stand your ground and refuse to be intimidated by someone who thinks their money makes them better than you. I have my peace, and I have my property, and most importantly, I have the satisfaction of knowing that I won. Every time I see the new fence, I am reminded that justice can be slow and dusty, but it is always worth the wait. The desert does not care about fancy cars or glass houses. It only cares about the truth, and the truth is that this land is mine. I spent the rest of the summer finishing my garden, and every time I planted a new agave or a prickly pear cactus, I felt like I was claiming a little bit more of my soul back. The noise of Julian's construction crews tearing up his own pool was like music to my ears. It was the sound of a bully having to undo his own mistakes. My friends from the neighborhood would come over, and we would sit on the tailgate of my truck and watch the progress. They all knew what Julian had tried to do, and they were all glad to see him get his comeuppance. Word travels fast in a small town, and soon everyone knew the story of the man who tried to steal 9 inches and lost 20 feet. Julian became a bit of a local legend, but not in the way he wanted. People would drive by slowly just to see the weirdly shaped pool and the driveway that had to make a sharp turn to stay on his property. It was a permanent reminder of his arrogance. As for me, I am just Emma Carter, the woman with the vintage trucks and the best view in the county. I do not hold a grudge anymore because I do not need to. The land has settled the score for me. I keep my tools clean and my trucks running, and I always make sure to check my boundaries. Sometimes I think about that old wooden post and I laugh. It was just a scrap of wood, but it started a revolution in my life. I am stronger now, and I know that I can handle whatever comes my way. The desert is a harsh place, but it is also fair if you know how to live by its rules. Julian did not know the rules, but he certainly knows them now. And every evening, as the sky turns that deep shade of purple, I am reminded that I am exactly where I am supposed to be. The heat of the day fades, and the cool night air moves in, and I am at peace. My property is more than just dirt and rocks. It is my home, and I will protect it forever. If anyone ever tries to take an inch from me again, they better be prepared to give back a mile, because I am not the woman I was a year ago. I am a woman who knows her worth and knows exactly where her line is drawn. The vintage Chevrolet looks beautiful in the moonlight, and I know that tomorrow will be another good day in the desert. The silence is back, and it is louder than ever. I can hear the coyotes howling in the distance and the wind whistling through the saguaros. It is a good life, and it is mine. I have everything I need right here, and no one is ever going to take that away from me again. Julian might have the big house and the fancy car, but I have the land and the story. And in the end, the story is what people remember. They will talk about the property line war for years to come, and they will always mention the woman who didn't back down. I am proud of that. I am proud of my home, and I am proud of my revenge. It was not about being mean, it was about being right. And being right feels better than any glass house ever could. So I will keep my trucks and my cactus and my 20 extra feet, and I will enjoy every single minute of it. The desert sun will rise again tomorrow, and I will be here to greet it from the comfort of my own land. My name is Emma Carter, and I am home. This whole experience taught me that sometimes you have to lose your peace for a little while to secure it for the rest of your life. I used to be afraid of conflict, but now I see it as a tool for clarity. Julian wanted a war and he got one, but he was not prepared for the terrain. He did not understand that out here we are like the plants we grow. We are tough and we have deep roots and we have thorns if you get too close. I do not think he will be staying much longer. I saw a for sale sign in his yard last week. I guess the embarrassment and the cost of the renovations were too much for him. I hope the next person who moves in is a little more humble and a lot more respectful. But even if they are not, I am ready. I have my survey papers filed with the county, and I have my fence, and I have my pride. I will never let anyone make me feel small again. The desert is big, and there is room for everyone, but only if you respect the lines. I am going to miss the look on Julian's face when he realized his pool was on my land, but I will not miss the man himself. Good riddance to bad neighbors, and here is to the beauty of a well-defined property line. I am going to take my truck for a drive tomorrow just because I can, and I will park it exactly where I want, because it is my land and it always was. The stars are coming out now, and they look brighter than they ever have. I think it is because there is no more anger blocking my view. I am just a 45-year-old woman in Arizona living her best life, and that is the best revenge of all. The dirt under my fingernails and the grease on my clothes are badges of honor. I am a part of this landscape, and I have earned my place here. Julian was just a visitor, but I am a permanent fixture. And that is something that no amount of money or fancy lawyers can ever change. I am Emma Carter, and this is my land. The story of the 9 inches and the 20 feet is over, but my life here is just beginning a new chapter. A chapter where I am the queen of my own dusty domain, and I have all the space I need to breathe. The air feels cleaner and the ground feels more solid under my feet. I am satisfied and I am free. This is the resolution I wanted, and it is the resolution I got. The desert always provides if you are patient and if you are right. And I have never been more right in my entire life. So here is to the property lines and the professional surveyors and the bullies who get what they deserve. May we all find our 20 feet of justice in this world. I am going to close my eyes now and listen to the sound of the desert. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. No more shouting, no more measuring tapes, and no more threats. Just the silence and the peace of a battle won. I am home and I am happy. The end of this struggle is the beginning of a long and quiet future. I am exactly where I belong. The trucks are safe, the land is mine, and the neighbor is gone. What more could a woman ask for in this life? I am Emma Carter and I am finally at peace. The sun has gone down completely now, and the moon is rising high over the cactus. It is a beautiful night in Arizona, and I am going to enjoy every second of it. Tomorrow is a new day, and I will spend it however I want on my own land. The property line is clear, and so is my conscience. I did what I had to do, and I would do it again in a heartbeat, because my peace is worth it, and so is my home. I am a desert rat, and I am proud of it. And I have all the room in the world to be exactly who I am. The end of Julian's reign of terror is the start of my reign of tranquility, and that is a trade I would make any day of the week. I am Emma Carter, and I am the winner of the property line war, and I have the 20 feet to prove it. Life is good, and the desert is mine. I am going to sleep well tonight knowing that everything is exactly as it should be. The brass pins are in the ground, and the truth is out in the open. There is nothing left to say and nothing left to do but live, and that is exactly what I plan to do. For as long as I am here, I will cherish this land and the victory I won. It is a story I will tell for years, and it is a story with a very happy ending for me. The neighbor from California might have had the money, but I had the grit, and the grit always wins in the end. Good night to the desert, and good night to the world. I am Emma Carter, and I am home.